got a projector, so this should help. Is there anybody who's not familiar with the Silk Road that I should explain it at some point, or are you all pretty much good? Okay, great. Well, first of all, I want to say to this group especially, it's kind of intimidating to talk to you guys because I'm very untechnical, and I usually don't understand anything you're talking about. And most everything. And, you know, it's been a really steep learning curve since Ross was arrested. I keep waiting for people to come out. Somebody write a dark net for dummies. Hasn't happened yet that I know of, so let me know if you see one. But one thing I do know is that you all are a very smart group of people with very advanced skills that most people don't have. And it puts you in a uniquely influential position in terms of our future, because I believe the future is going to be taking place in the digital world. Before we get started, I talked to Ross this past weekend, Wednesday, and told him I was coming here, and he thought it was great. And so he gave me some words for you. So I'm going to read them to you. I'm writing you from my cell in a U.S. federal detention facility in Manhattan. Despite being caged and told I'll never be let out, I remain optimistic because of people like you at this conference. Many of you have exceptional knowledge and skills unheard of at any other time in history. You have the power to help forge the foundations of the future we are living into. I believe it is critical that those foundations support the normal, civilized people of the world and empower them to live free, productive lives to their full potential. The more that the many are empowered, the harder it will be for the few to dominate them. Unfortunately, many use their skills and knowledge to cheat or harm the vulnerable for personal gain or to hurt others. Please resist any urge to abuse your power. We will never get a better opportunity than right now to make a better, freer world. It's been said that a room full of darkness is overcome by one bright light. We can each be that light. Ross Ulbricht. So, unbelievably, the person who wrote that letter was sentenced to double life without parole for all nonviolent charges. No victims were named at trial. No one came forward as a victim. He wasn't even charged with selling drugs. He wasn't charged with doing any direct harm to anybody. So what did he do? What did he do to deserve this draconian sentence? Did he take an automatic weapon and mow people down? Did he take a bomb and blow up a school or a nightclub? Did he use a knife to rape someone? Why did he get a harsher sentence than many murderers and violent people? The government alleges his only weapon was a keyboard. And they made it very clear that the sentence was based on a platform, not on harming someone or on a product like drugs. Andy Greenberg, who you may have heard at the panel, tweeted, "Has anyone in history ever been more harshly punished for something they did with a computer?" That should make everyone in this room think about the ramifications of this case. So what did they have to prove that it was Ross? You know, it was said in that panel that they had tons of evidence. There's a lot of questions about that evidence. It was all digital. And I think this room knows how easily manipulated and tampered with digital evidence is. It's very fragile. It's very vulnerable to that. I've been told that by many experts. Did they have DNA? Did they have actual witnesses who said, yeah, Ross hired me, or yeah, I saw him do something? I saw him on the keyboard with Silk Road. No. Did they have fingerprints? No. They had only digital evidence. A mortgage company will not accept a screenshot of a bank statement because they know how easily faked it is. And yet a man can be put away for life based on this flimsy evidence. Our lawyer said this lowers the standard of evidence for all trials. This sets a precedent that's very dangerous. Well, let's give you a quick example. On the 5th day, an exhibit was put up on the screen of chats, and with a timestamp next to each one, each entry, and they were all identical down to the second. Sorry, I don't think that's possible. And someone I know, he's not a lawyer, but he goes to a lot of trials. He goes, the only reason you do that is to tamper with the evidence. That's just one tiny example. So in January, this past January, Ross and his lawyer submitted an appeal. It's 2.5 times the length of the average appeal, and they said they could have put a ton more in there, but they're just not allowed to, it's too much. And it's an epic document that defends not only Ross's due process rights, but the due process rights of all Americans, because this trial was an attack on that. Now, I wanted to say, if a country doesn't have fair trials, how can we say we're a free country? It's like every trial that is unfair and allowed to stand takes us one step closer to tyranny, in my opinion. So it was a long appeal, but the government, they're really good writing a lot of stuff, as you may know from your IRS forms and things like that. It was even longer. 4 prosecutors worked on it. They wrote 186 pages of basically government speak, and it was boils down to the judge was right, the defense was wrong, and any adverse decisions were the defense's fault. And we know that because the government says so. That's why. So one of the main issues, and it was touched on in the panel, was the suppression of evidence, very important evidence that was, and it wasn't the only example of suppression of evidence, by the way, but it was the main one, that would have been favorable to Ross, and that involved these 2 people, federal agents, the core of the investigation in Maryland, who were not only investigating it, but they were there because they were computer experts. They had the ability to do a lot of things that most people can't do on a computer. They were experts, forensic, and they gained high-level administrative access to Silk Road, and they could do pretty much what they wanted. They had the keys to the kingdom, so they could change passwords, PIN numbers, commandeer accounts, including DPR's account. They could act as DPR. They had several aliases they also acted as. They had the means to manipulate and create logs, chats, private messages on the forum and the marketplace. They could access accounts, bank accounts, keys, basically the case of the kingdom. And they had access to the evidence that the jury was looking at later. In addition, Carl Force played the single biggest role in this allegedly organizing a murder for hire with DPR. It's often referred to as a murder. There was no murder, to be clear. There were no bodies. No one claimed murder. It was planned murder, allegedly. Never charged at trial, but we'll get to that. It was basically based on chats from a corrupt agent who is now in prison. And I if he had access to change chats, I asked an expert. I said, well, what's to say he didn't write the whole script? And he said, nothing. There's absolutely no way to know. And yet they used it to smear Ross. They used it to deprive him of bail, saying he was dangerous and violent. He's a total peaceful libertarian, believes in peace, it's absurd. They used it to deprive the defense of the witness list until a couple days before trial. They talked about it extensively at trial, used it to justify their sentence. And to be clear, here's a quote from the prosecution at trial. He said, hey, we're not charging him with this. You know, we don't have the proof. We're not bringing it to trial, but, you know, and no murders occurred. But, and then he went on to talk about it for, I don't know, a long time, hours. And gee, you think the jury was prejudiced just a little by that? So, even in this appeal response, they have a whole section, Ulbricht's willingness to use violence. It wasn't even in the trial. They're just putting it in there, again, I assume to influence the appellate court. It's kind of scary when you think that you can be, they can use uncharged, unproven allegations to contribute to a life sentence of someone. Now, in the appeal, there's an amicus brief filed by the Drug Policy Alliance, joined by a former federal judge, LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, and Just Leadership USA. And they say this sentence relies way too much, and they say many things, but one of the things is it's not right to sentence somebody on something that hasn't even gone to trial, that you haven't even convicted them of. And my question has always been, well, you know, if Ross is guilty, why don't you charge him with it? I mean, they certainly aren't shy about charging people with things. They pile on charges. So back to these guys. You know, yeah, it's scandalous. Big shock, government agents stole money, they were corrupt. But what's really scandalous is that the jury was not allowed to know about it. They did not know these guys existed, and they were looking at evidence that these guys had access to. It was fought pre-trial by the defense, and the court said, well, the government's reason was, well, it's going to jeopardize our investigation if it becomes known at trial that you know, about these guys. And so we said, well, okay, well, wait, you know, do your investigation, then we'll go to trial, and we'll be able to say all the evidence. And the court said, no, we're going to do it now. Then after trial, it all came out, and it also came out that it wouldn't have jeopardized anything. They already knew they were under investigation. They had been interviewed by law enforcement. So, our lawyer said that to this day, we don't even know the extent of the corruption. We know the tip of the iceberg. In fact, something just came out recently that Bridges stole another $700,000. It keeps coming out. We don't really even know how many agents were really involved. I have my own theories. There were numerous encrypted emails these guys had that were not, they didn't ask them to decrypt them as part of their plea deal. They still remain encrypted. There's undisclosed evidence and sealed information. And I'm like, well, you know, why? What are you hiding? And the government's like, well, it's irrelevant. That's one of their favorite words, by the way, I've noticed. If it's irrelevant, then why don't you make it known? So we'll never know if this jury, and Josh Horowitz touched on this at the panel, people remember the first thing they hear in a trial and the last thing. So the first thing they hear was not about them. If it had been, how do we know that and known the extent of the corruption, if that jury would have thought there was reasonable doubt to convict Ross? Obviously, the prosecutors thought there was a threat of that because they fought tooth and nail for the jury not to know about it. So our attorney said it's obvious that the government is more interested in protecting its unfairly obtained conviction than investigating fully or effectively the misconduct of its corrupt agents. It's clear that the defense was not told everything, that the government was not interested in knowing the full extent of the agent's criminality. Even now, more is coming out about the corruption, and defense only hears about it from the media. not from the government, which is obliged to reveal it. That's the law. And this is a continuing travesty of justice. The law is the Brady Rule. It's well-established law that says that you're not allowed to hide evidence favorable to a defendant. It's an epidemic in this country. Judge Kaczynski of the Ninth Circuit's written about it extensively, saying prosecutors break this law all the time to get their conviction. Well, the government's answer in their reply is, well, we won't let anybody see the Brady material because, well, there is no Brady material. If there were, we'd disclose it. You can trust us. And again, their excuse for precluding it, well, it's irrelevant. And that the judge was correct in trusting the government to tell the truth. We don't even know if the judge has seen the sealed evidence. We don't know. She said there was no particularized need to unseal the corruption evidence. You know, it's not important. A lawyer I know said this court-imposed secrecy is a dark cloud over this trial and many others. This is not unique. Another big problem and issue in the appeal is this blocked cross-examination. Whoops, sorry, this is messed up. Oh, real quick, since this is on here, this is last minute. They also said the corruption, we didn't work with Maryland. Those guys from Maryland, we're from New York, and it was completely separate. We never talked about it. It was like it's not relevant to the trial. And yet they put in evidence based on Force's work under his aliases, and then they redacted it before the trial. But in addition, this man spoke to Ian Duncan of the Baltimore Sun and said, yeah, we did work together. He's a senior level DHS guy. He said we split up tasks. The two teams cooperated. The New York FBI worked on breaking encryption. The Maryland was tasked with developing informants. Quote, the two teams began to try to figure out what they each had. Everyone had that little piece of the puzzle. Then it was time to sit at the table and put it together, a process carried out in a series of conferences and phone calls. I think that sounds like working together. I mean, so either they're lying to the media or they're lying to the court. But they say, no, even if we did work together, which we didn't, but if we did, it didn't taint the evidence. So it's not relevant. So, okay. And you know that because the government says so. I wanted to say, my PowerPoint's usually a little more polished, but it's a formatting thing, last minute. Okay, so the next thing involves this man, Special Agent Jared Yergin. He worked undercover on Silk Road for 2 years, thousands of hours, and he was a government witness, government evidence. And he testified in court. I heard him with my own ears. He said, I think there are many DPRs. Of course, that is a big question, and some of the evidence that was suppressed is indicating there were many DPRs. Alex Winter told me, he said, the word I'm getting from people on Silk Road is, yeah, of course there were lots of DPRs. But in any case, they wanted their one guy, and but he said that in trial, and he testified that he had built a substantial case against one DPR, Mark Karpelis, who was a computer systems developer and operated multiple websites, and he had signed a sworn affidavit that he had reasonable cause to pursue Karpelis, and that he sought a warrant for his Gmail and Facebook accounts, or just Gmail, sorry. And so this was all starting to come out in trial, and all of a sudden, oops, the prosecutor, he leaps up. He's like, wait, whoa, objection, objection. We cannot have this line of questioning continue. Stop right now. And the judge was confused. She's like, why? This is normal procedure, and he just kept arguing and said this testimony must stop. And finally she didn't call a sidebar, which is normally what you do. She sent the jury home an hour early. Our lawyer said he had another hour to go at least in questioning this agent. And she said she was doing this in the interest of justice. Then, and these are quotes from the transcript. Anything I have in quotes is right in the transcript. Well, our attorney again cited the Brady rule, saying it's unfavorable to the defendant to keep this agent from testifying. And the judge agreed. And then she said, well, this is going to be kind of messed up. But anyway, what the agent was saying was highly relevant. It was directly relevant, obviously relevant. That says obviously highly relevant. Or clearly relevant. Oh, sorry. There's the obviously highly relevant. I knew it was there somewhere. And that what he was doing was actually in the heartland of the defense, and that the fact that Karpeles could be a DPR had come out in spades. The prosecutor kept arguing, and finally she said, the cat's out of the bag about Karpeles. This is in the transcript. And court adjourned. We're going home for a long weekend. So, when I got back to court, I felt like I was in a different universe. It was a totally different courtroom. Suddenly all that relevant stuff, well, that wasn't relevant. The jury was instructed to forget they ever heard it. And a muzzle, a short leash was put on the defense about what he could and could not ask. So, for example, did you suspect Mark Karpeles? No, you can't ask that. Did you believe Mark Karpeles was DPR? That's off limits. Do you suspect that Mark Karpeles operated Silk Road? No, you can't ask that. And the offer, oh my God, I forgot to tell you about the offer. I think, did I? I think I did. When the agent was pursuing Mark Karpeles, he testified that DHS Maryland, where the corrupt agents were, tipped off Karpeles by seizing $2.9 million from his account. Then he testified that there was a meeting between Karpeles' lawyers and DHS Maryland, where Karpeles said, I will give you DPR's name if you, or the lawyer said, if you back off our client Karpeles. 2 weeks later, Ross was arrested. This came out before the prosecution stopped it. So that offer, well, that wasn't relevant. So we have day 3, and then we have day 4. So what are we going to? What a difference a weekend makes. And one of the reasons the judge gave that this was happening, well, that alternate perpetrator, it might confuse the jury. We wouldn't want to do that, would we? And Joshua Draytell said, well, my defense has been eviscerated, completely eviscerated. And Forbes, Sarah Jong wrote, yeah, it was completely derailed. And it stayed that way the rest of the trial. The government, their answer is, well, the judge correctly cut off that testimony because the discussion, well, it's irrelevant. And why is it irrelevant? Well, the usual. The government says so. So now, oh, there's another one. The cat was back in the bag. And it stayed that way for the rest of the trial. By the end of the trial, there was like, a lot of cats swarming around in that bag. The appeal addresses other instances of blocked cross-examination, suppression, all that. But another thing that it brings up, which was brought up at the panel, was blocked technical and forensic witnesses. The government brought a string of witnesses to talk about the laptop, to talk about their investigation. And by the way, their protocols highly questioned. I had an expert tell me he believes that there was evidence planted on the laptop. He said it's highly questionable. Why else would they have broken protocols so many times? Christopher Beeson, a U.S. agent, testified that he didn't follow investigative guidelines. And when the defense attempted to cross-examine these people, it was either curtailed or completely denied. And finally, the judge goes, look, if you want to know about this investigation, call your own witness. Well, at that point, Joshua Dratel submitted one of his many calls for a mistrial because the defense is not required to prove anything. It's the prosecution that has to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. And to ask us to bring our own witness was not following that rule, which you would think a federal judge would know. In any case, we did. Stephen Bellavin, who's an expert from Columbia University, and he was ready to talk about the lack of security on open ports. Ross was actually on an open network downloading the Colbert Report in the library, and then responded to a request to go on Silk Road, which apparently many people could do. And then he could have talked about timestamps. I alluded to the timestamps before. He could have explained that to the jury. They didn't have any idea. And why complex technology in hidden websites is almost impossible to prove. He could have explained the unreliability of digital evidence that they were looking at on a screen. That's all they had. But he was not allowed to come to the stand. And one of the reasons was, well, this case doesn't require special technical knowledge. We had the government had a Bitcoin witness come, which, by the way, they paid $55,000 of your tax money to have. And actually, the witness didn't do most of the work, but he came to present it. And there's a lot of questions about his explanation of Bitcoin by experts. This is what Roger Ver had to say about it. The prosecutors have no clue how Bitcoin works, so they're intentionally lying about it. So we wanted to bring our own witness, and Andreas Antonopoulos, well, you can see what's going to happen. Andreas Antonopoulos was going to come down pro bono. He was not going to ask for anything, just to come down to convey the truth and accuracy about Bitcoin. And he was told, don't get on that plane. You can't testify. And one of the reasons was, well, the jury understands Bitcoin just fine. It would be irrelevant and unnecessary to have him talk. This is one of the main things in the appeal as well. So our attorney said, by precluding these experts who could have explained to the jury, who, as Alex pointed out, really were way over their head in trying to understand it, and I don't blame them. I mean, it's difficult. That Ross was denied his Fifth and Sixth Amendment right to defend himself. You have a right to defend yourself in this country. So, I'm never sure what I have in this PowerPoint. So this kind of sums it up. The defense was not allowed to know about the forced corruption till very late. Never knew about Bridges at all till after trial. Wasn't allowed to tell the jury about it. Wasn't allowed to pursue government investigation into an alternate perpetrator. Wasn't allowed to challenge the government testimony. And wasn't allowed to present the experts. But the government said it was free to pursue its theories. And how do we know that they were free? Government says so. Now, another really important, I think I had more government says so on there at one point, but it's the PowerPoint. So, the good one I have does, or the formatted one. Anyway, another really important point, oh, there it is. There's lots of them. It concerns the Fourth Amendment. And I'm sure you all know it's a foundational law that protects our privacy and from government intrusion. It's essential to a free life, as Cindy Cohn said in the movie. And one of the things about the Fourth Amendment is it requires particularity. You have to say what you're searching for. You can't just go rummaging around in someone's house, for example, from attic to basement to see what you can find, to have a, go on a fishing expedition. But basically that's what they did in Ross's digital house. And they had used what was called a general warrant. We fought the American Revolution over this. This is the foundation of the Fourth Amendment, why it was written, to prevent this kind of rummaging. And an amicus brief with the appeal was filed by the National Association of Criminal Lawyers, Defense Lawyers, and joined by EFF, Electronic Frontier Foundation, saying, yeah, these general warrants are unconstitutional. And the government said, well, just because the warrants authorized searchings of all Ross's writings and all his travel and other general information and kind of rummaging around and all that, it doesn't mean they weren't specific. But even if they were, even if there's problems, the judge was still right to suppress the evidence because the agents operated on good faith. And we know they operated on good faith because, well, the government says so. Losing track here. And that is a reason that's being given a lot. And I'm like, well, so if I speed and get stopped by a policeman, and I say, hey, I did it in good faith, I didn't, that's okay? Or hey, how about running a website in good faith? Is that okay? And they're using this, judges are upholding this in good faith argument in cases, and it's very concerning. Because our lawyer said if it had been a physical file cabinet and physical files, it would be clearly unconstitutional. The government's saying that because it's digital, it's not protected. Well, we all know a computer is a file cabinet on steroids. It's a gateway to all kinds of information. And they're saying it's not protected, that we're giving up our right to privacy by using digital material. This is a really, really important point that hopefully in the appeal will be pushed back. Okay, the next thing is the sentence, this barbaric sentence given to someone for all nonviolent charges with, and I've just touched on some of the violations in the trial, which I consider a lynching, frankly. It's a raw abuse of government power. The Eighth Amendment says you cannot issue cruel and unusual punishment. It's definitely unusual, and I think it's cruel as well. And Supreme Court rulings say sentences that are barbarous, outrageous, inhumane, or shock the social consciousness are unconstitutional. But the government says, no, it's totally reasonable. It's reasonable. The judge was perfectly right. She was very dispassionate. Meanwhile, at sentencing, she relied on unsubstantiated, unproven allegations, not only of murder for hire, but of 6 alleged deaths. Well, they did die, but overdoses. Somehow related to Silk Road, somehow. So she never specified how. And she said, as long as it was somehow in association with Silk Road, then Ross is responsible for these deaths. Not the vendor, not the user, not how it was related, just somehow we just know it was. She ignored a pathology report from a medical expert of 30 years who said that the accusations are incomplete, unreliable, and inaccurate. And the government instead said, well, our evidence outweighs what he said, so we're the experts, and she was right, and that's reasonable, and of course the usual reason we say it's reasonable. So, and by the way, the government seized the Silk Road server months before Ross was arrested, and 2 of those overdose deaths happened then, so I'm wondering, are they responsible? Just wondering. And the judge also said, well, this sentence is going to deter other people from using it, and of course that's not true, and of course it was pointed out at the panel, they're bigger and more of them than ever. And but the the government says, oh, the judge properly considered general and specific deterrence to warn all others who might contemplate internet drug sales. It doesn't, hasn't. And anyway, I thought we were tried as an individual in this country, not as a example, deterrent, and shouldering the burden for all future crimes. In fact, the government passed the Sentencing Reform Act. It was also referred to in the panel. A sentence must be sufficient but not greater than necessary. She never said why it was necessary to put Ross for something he did allegedly, that they're saying he did in his 20s, that it's necessary to put him away for life, to be basically buried alive for the rest of until he dies, because he's so dangerous. She never said why. And the act from Congress was to prevent this kind of unfair sentence. It was to prevent the harshness. That's why they created it. And it was also to prevent grotesque disparity, this is out of the appeal, for the similar crimes and different sentences out of proportion. So to give you an example, this Jan Slump was convicted as the top drug seller on Silk Road. He got 10 years. Stephen Sadler, biggest cocaine and heroin dealer on Silk Road, he got 5 years. Peter Nash, who was a top-level admin during 2 of the ODs, height of the Silk Road, he got 17 months. And don't get me wrong, I don't wish they got more. But Ross got double life without parole as a senior admin and creator, convicted of. So why? Why is there this disparity? And so I believe, and people have asked me, do you think Ross is a political prisoner? And I used to say, well, that's kind of hyperbolic. I don't know if I should say that, really. I don't really know that that's true. And now I believe it is. Oh, and by the way, the agents got 7 and 6 years. And recently, the guy who was running Silk Road 2.0 got 8 years. So why Ross? Now, the judge said to him in sentencing, you're no different than any drug dealer on the street. And Cody Wilson said, well, then why don't you sentence him as one? Well, they made it clear why. They considered Silk Road politically dangerous. They needed an example. She even referred at sentencing saying, I'm not sure that you've abandoned your political beliefs, and that she was punishing him because of his political views. And she said, because you still might have them, and I just don't know. So just in case, we're going to put you away for life, because I think these beliefs are dangerous. She referenced DPR's writing at sentencing and the libertarian philosophy of the site. Now, this is a woman who has taken an oath to protect our First Amendment rights and political speech, using it to bolster this sentence. Oh, well, I have another government says so. I'm not sure what that was for. I'm sure something. And she said the quotes on Silk Road forum, not saying Ross even did it, but they're on the forum saying that the government's the oppressor, that's terribly misguided and very dangerous, and so I'm going to use this against you in the sentencing. A lawyer I know said, well, I don't think Thomas Jefferson or James Madison would likely have fared well if brought before Judge Forrest because of their similarly dangerous views. So I believe Ross is a political prisoner. I think he's been made an example. I think that he's like the poster boy of the dark web and of the drug war. And as such, I believe he's a prisoner of war. I'm not sure what's coming up next. Oh, that's me. Here I am. I was brought to Eastern Europe to talk at another hackers conference. I said, hey, I don't know anything about this. You don't want me, believe me. And they said, no, we want you to talk about freedom. And it was a real privilege. And then we went through Poland. And those people understand tyranny. They've lived under Stalin and Hitler. And part of it, we went to Auschwitz. So there I am at Auschwitz, very sobering, grim experience. And I overheard a tour guide saying to his group, the lesson here is watch your politicians. That wasn't that long ago. So I believe we're at a crossroads in history. And we've left the 20th century. We're careening into the digital age. It's going very, very fast. You guys are right in it. And it's a very pivotal time in history. And it's very pivotal in the courts because it's uncharted territory. And they're deciding all kinds of things, like the Fourth Amendment, that are going to impact all of us going forward, these laws. I think it's as pivotal as the time of the American Revolution. I mean, I think it's really important right now. And those guys in the American Revolution were your age. A lot of them were in their teens, 20s, and 30s. And I would suggest that you have an interesting challenge and a similar challenge with yourselves to resist tyranny and to make history, because we're here. It's your moment in history. And, you know, your future, I have a future. I assume it's shorter than your future. I hope so for your sake. It's your future. It's your world. This is what's happening now. So we're at this crossroads to decide whether are we going to go towards innovation and freedom and privacy, or are we going to go towards more government intrusion and control. It's still up for grabs. So people ask me who Ross is a lot. I don't have these. Ross is one of you. He would fit in here so well. He would love to be here hearing all the, he's only 15 minutes away, by the way, but he would, can't get him over here. Something else came up. He's one of you. He really is. He has a lot of the values you have, and that from people I've talked to, and would be so interested. And he needs your help. And so I really ask you, please go to freeross.org and help us. You know, we're one family. It's almost impossible for ordinary people to fight for justice in this country. You have to have millions and millions of dollars. They're crushingly expensive. Not just lawyers, but experts. And the guy who bound the appeal into book form and gave it to the court, 13 grand. More than $13,000. It's just crazy. And we have lots of things. There's a tax-deductible option for helping prisoners, including Ross. There's an art project, a game based on Ross's art. There's posters downstairs for sale of that, the previous art. I've got T-shirts and pins, a little store down in the vendors area by the escalators. I just ask you to, you know, and also it's not just money. I know everybody doesn't have a lot of money, but also you guys know a lot. You know a whole lot more than I do. And, you know, if you have any help to offer or connections, always like to hear from you. So anyway, I just want to wrap up by saying, you know, help us bring attention to the bigger issues. There are big issues here at play. And, you know, for all of us, not just Ross. Thank you. We have time for, do we need to?
Questions,
yeah, I guess we can do some questions, yeah.
I got to see the movie last night, and it was really powerful. One of the things that you said in the movie was the solidarity you felt with the other families going to visit their relatives in prison, and also understanding the political nature of Ross's and other hackers in prison. It made me wonder how much, and if there's an opportunity to build alliance with another community that's had a lot of unrecognized political prisoners
Yeah.
and this community's political prisoners and really address the state that's sort of overreaching itself in those cases.
Yeah, and in fact, I go to the prison regularly, and the families, we all get to know each other, and I really feel like I'm speaking for them too, because it's just, I see families torn apart. I see children clinging to their fathers after one measly hour a week. I see wives and partners and parents, and it's devastating to all of us. Two of the amicus briefs were filed by organizations led by black men. It's not, I do see that, yes, that's true that there's mostly minorities in the prison, but this precedent will affect everyone. And so I think it's really a human issue, but it is a racial issue, and I have, like, Just Leadership USA is led by a black man who was in prison and vowed to the other people there that he would fight for reducing the mass incarceration, and he's on our appeal. I'm just trying to speak out and reach out, and yeah, I think that it's really a universal issue. I mean, the United States has more people behind bars and cages than any other country in the world. That's a disgrace. It's horrible. And then when you see how they prosecute people, and I can go on. I mean, it's a little big subject, but I do plan to continue with that subject after I get Ross out and during. So yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah.
So I'll point out that this isn't particularly new to the hacker community.
Oh, I'm looking at you back there. I'm sorry.
You should meet somebody named Bernie S. here, who is one of the first examples.
Bernie, yeah, well, he runs this thing. Yeah, we've talked.
Generally speaking, when it comes to technology cases, the government's approach has been very similar to what we're seeing with Ross.
Yeah.
If the government perceives an individual as a political threat, they'll come down like a ton of bricks. And the Chinese government, the Russian government also do the same thing.
Sure.
If you're just stealing money, they know they can wrap their head around that, and you end up with 5-year sentence or something. So yeah, this is very much in line with what we've seen. What needs to happen actually isn't pursuing justice through the courts. The law doesn't matter with these kinds of cases. What matters are who the politicians are. And so what we actually need to be working on doing as a community is changing politicians who do not understand technology for politicians who do, which results in better policy.
Well, yeah. Gary Johnson told me he'd pardon Ross if he's elected. So he's
Clear to all the feds here, I believe in democracy. I believe in running for office and voting. I'm not urging violent overthrow of anything.
Me neither. Me neither.
Have it.
Yeah.
I've been in China
No.
for 3 years.
Yeah.
They don't have a democracy
No.
there. We still have all the institutions. We can change our government if we only have the will to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying they're better. Totalitarians are kind of very similar. They're all kind of alike in a way. And yeah, but that's a long process. In the meantime, I want to get Ross out, so I've got to do what I can do. But yeah, thank you. He's got a lot to give. He's got a lot to give. Yeah, way back there.
Not so much a question.
Yeah.
Just to kind of put the severity and the ludicrousness of Ross's sentence into perspective, if anybody really needs it. Being from Boston, I followed Whitey Bulger's trial very much. Whitey Bulger was charged with and convicted of 11 counts of murder on top of 20 other charges ranging from racketeering to extortion, and he was given 2 life sentences. He was given the same exact sentence that Ross was given. Just think about that. That is disgusting in this country.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I talked to a guy who he's a psychiatric nurse in a hospital, and a guy who had killed his entire family was there for treatment. He got 40 years. Lots of murder. Charles Manson got less of a sentence because he comes up for parole every once in a while. Well, that's a whole other issue of why is there no parole in the federal system. It used to be until the 80s and the drug war. It's really wrong.
The statement, not a question. Statement is, the issues are sentencing guidelines are way too strict for every federal crime.
Agreed.
The second issue is, every federal statute is written so broadly, it can be applied in almost any case. For anyone who's doing any hacking, chances are you're committing federal felony crimes. There's an excellent book by Alan Dershowitz
Yeah.
called Three Felonies a
Right.
Day.
You don't have to be a hacker to be doing.
The feds can twist anything you do to be a federal felony. And then they use coercion, coercive tactics, threaten to arrest your family
Yeah.
to get you to break. That's the state we're in. So my question to you is, knowing that the federal prosecutors have 93% success rate when they bring a prosecution,
97, I believe.
do you think we are in a fair society? Do you think you can get a fair trial anywhere in the U.S. right now?
I've lost my faith in the justice system. I have. I'm sad to say it. I feel like our country and our Constitution are being hijacked. I do. And what I saw at that trial was jaw-dropping. I couldn't believe. I wasn't a big fan of the government before, but I was just like, it was shocking. It was shocking to see. So yeah, no. If we don't have fair trials, we do not have a free country. Every, totalitarian state has show trials. That's, yeah.
What aspect of Ross's supposed political ideology will you judge for that disagree with? I mean, you're asserting that it's a political imprisonment to a certain degree, and it was a libertarian. So I'm wondering when you feel it's exactly the political check that made the difference to the judge, and what we can do about the culture of that. I don't know.
Well, I don't think it was. Oh God, I don't. There's some things I don't want to say. I can tell you that she was recommended for her position by Chuck Schumer. The lead prosecutor was his special counsel for years. Chuck Schumer was on the banking committee, and I don't know how they felt about Bitcoin and an independent currency. Chuck Schumer pushed this case. It's even in the movie. This wouldn't have even been investigated. It wasn't. There's a lot of Chuck Schumer in this case, and it was tried in in New York when Ross was arrested in California. So those are just facts. I think there was a lot of things at play. The fact that there was political beliefs brought up to me is a First Amendment issue, and it's very scary to me that what we say and our beliefs can be used against us like that.
Just to clarify, so you
Yeah.
think it was associated with something to do with the use of Bitcoin as an alternate currency?
And Tor. And I think the whole idea of the platform, this is my personal opinion, was very threatening. Not being able to be controlled. Yeah.
Aside from all of the technical issues, it's clear from what you've said and shown us that the judge disrespected all of the rules, and this was a complete candidate court.
Thank you for your comment. There's a lot of things in that appeal that pretty shocking. Thank you. Yes, sorry. I'm nodding at you. I'm talking. Sorry.
Could have caused the difference in attitude between that Friday and Tuesday.
I'll just leave that up to you guys to theorize on that. I have no proof of anything. That's what happened. I just know it was total 180 about face. In addition, the judge, I didn't mention this, went back and said to the prosecution, you should have objected here, 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 and here, and I will retroactively sustain those objections if you go ahead and object now. Who does this? Yes. She said it. It's in the transcript. Mm-hmm. It certainly is. Yeah.
What does it take to impeach a federal judge? This one. Yeah, you can't do this, I mean,
Yeah, I think it's very hard. I think there's a lot of really good judges, and I'm concerned not only about prosecutors, but the judiciary in this country. And, like, for example, the Fourth Amendment is not being upheld in the courts, in my opinion. Yeah. Well, thanks a lot. There's somebody coming up right after me. Be great, but thank you so much.